Today we're talking about the Chinese, Russian, and Swiss Beauty and the Beast because there are so many versions of this story all over the world that I'm making a third video about it. As I've said before, there's so many versions of the same kind of story across cultures because of trade and travel. And we can't ever really know which ones came first. We can sometimes know which ones were written down and published first. But like Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast is one that just every culture seems to hold on to. The one from China is called The Fairy Serpent. Now, almost all of the European ones start similarly, where a dad has 3 daughters and he's going on a trip and he is going to bring back something for each of them. And they each ask for something. And the third one, who's sometimes called Beauty or just is the most beautiful or the nicest, asks for something like a rose. In the Chinese one, again, there is a man who has 3 daughters, but he isn't going on a trip. All 3 of them are really skilled at embroidery, and they embroider flowers that he finds and brings back to them. So one day he goes out like looking for flowers. He finds himself in the realm of this fairy serpent, which is sort of dragon-like in most of the artwork. It coils around him and he's like, "What you doing in my garden?" And he's like, "I was just looking for flowers for my daughters." And so the serpent's like, "Tell me the ages and names of your daughters." So he does, and he's like, "All right, I gotta marry one of them if you want me to let you go." And he agrees. He tries to justify it to himself by saying he feared greater evil would be done to his daughters if they were deprived of his protection if he died. Which, like, fair, but you're selling your daughters to save yourself. I'm not judging, it's just true. So in a lot of the European stories, it's the third one that the beast creature wants because it's the third one he was getting the flower for. But in this one, he's gonna have to pick which of his daughters to give up. He doesn't want to do that, so he goes home and just won't eat and is depressed and won't take care of himself. The daughters are super concerned that their dad's like wasting away before them, and so they're like, "Okay, let's go one at a time and try to talk to him." So the first one goes and says, "Hey, why won't you eat?" And he's like, "I can't. But also, hey, if I promised you to marry a snake, would you do it?" And she's like, "No." And he's like, "Okay." And she leaves. So the same thing happens with the second one. She's like, "Please eat, father." And he's like, "I can't, but hey, would you marry a snake for me?" And she's like, "No, I would not do that." And he's like, "Oh, okay." But of course, the third daughter, when she comes in, he's like, "Would you marry a snake?" She's like, "If you will start eating again and take care of yourself, father, I will do whatever you ask." And he's like, "Yes!" He starts eating again and he gets better, and they kind of live happily for a while, and he starts thinking maybe the snake's not gonna come for her. It doesn't, but some wasps do. At first, one wasp comes in and starts saying, "Buzz, buzz, and come the faster, who will wed the snake, my master?" More and more wasps come in, and the girls are trying to swat them away, and soon it's just filled with wasps, and they can't bear the stings anymore. So the youngest is finally like, "Okay, I'll go." The wasps take her down the road to this huge palace where the fairy snake lived. It said the snake had beautiful eyes and a musical voice, but its skin was very warty, and the girl shuddered at the thought of being with him daily. But they straight up legally get married and have a wedding supper. And she says, "I appreciate all of this food and finery you're giving me. I will perform my domestic duties as required." So she cooks, she cleans, she made all things pleasant for her, quote, repulsive bridegroom. And it says he doted upon her and he was kind to her. And eventually she starts to feel lonely when he's not around, and, they have feelings for each other. Well, one day she goes out to fetch water from the well, but the well's dry. So she has to go further away to find some water. And when she comes back, she can't find the snake. She eventually finds him in the garden and he's like dying of thirst. So she plunges him into her bucket of water and he emerges as a handsome human man. He'd apparently been enchanted, and her being dutiful and caring has set him free. And they live happily ever after. Now there's a Russian version called The Enchanted Tsarevich that also has the beast being a giant snake. Like other European versions, it starts with the merchant going on the trip and he asks his 3 daughters what they want, and the first 2 ask for warm fur coats. Normally they ask for like jewels and silk gowns, but it's Russia. They're cold. Now the third one, like normal, asks for a special flower, and in this one, she literally sketches it, she draws it. She's like, "This specific flower, I want this." And he's like, "Well, that'll be hard to find, but I'll do it." So as he's traveling, he finds this amazing palace that has this fantastic flower, and he takes it, but as soon as he does, the snake shows up. He's like, "Please let me go home. I just want to take this flower to one of my daughters." And the snake's like, "Okay, but once you go home, whatever greets you first, you have to send back to me." And this is something that happens in a lot of fairy tales. So he goes home, and of course, the youngest daughter is the first to rush out of the house and greet him, and he's like, "Oh no." He starts crying, and she's like, "What's wrong?" And he tells her, and she's immediately like, "Hey, it's God's gift. Perhaps I shall fare well. I'ma go." Like in most of these stories, she lives in opulence. She has all the food she wants, all the entertainment she wants. She's waited on by servants. And the snake is super nice to her. And I have to point this out because a common criticism of the Disney Beauty and the Beast is the whole Stockholm Syndrome thing. People have problems with her eventually falling in love with him when he starts as her captor. However, I've seen people point this out a lot, and someone said it on my podcast too. Really, the most problematic part of Disney's Beauty and the Beast for me is that the Beast is abusive. He breaks things, he yells, he threatens her. He is a domestic abuser that she then learns to love because she changes him. And I just want people to know that in all of these stories, that's not the case. If you go back and see my other videos or just look up the French, the German, the English, all of these versions of this fairy tale, he's always kind and good to her. Yes, she probably wouldn't have chosen to go there in the first place, but she always goes by her own will in these stories. But more importantly, he treats her well. Makes a lot more sense that she falls in love with him in these stories when he's a good person to her, even though he looks like a beast. He's not a beast inside. I've seen women on here say that they think girls who grew up with the 90s movie, like me, ended up maybe even dead or in abusive relationships because that message was so harmful that if a man throws things or yells at you or threatens you or bangs on the door or says you're not going to eat if you don't eat with him, that thinking that that's okay and you can fix him has caused horrible harm. And I'd agree. I just love that these stories don't actually do that. Okay, so back to the Russian story. Here's another example of him being slow and kind with her. They get married, but the first night he's like, hey, I want to sleep in a bed outside your bedroom. And she's like, okay. Then the next night he's like, can we put my bed next to your bed? And she's like, okay. And then the third night, he's like, can we sleep together in the same bed? And by then she's kind of warmed up to it. And she's like, okay. So they spend the night together. And the next morning he's like, you can go visit your father and sisters. Just make sure you come back on time. When she goes to visit them, she tells them how happy she is, how the snake is really nice, how she's really happy with this situation. And the sisters are jealous. And so this happens in a lot of other stories too. They purposely try to keep her past when she's supposed to go back until she ends up going back late. And of course, he's almost dying when she gets there. So when she sees him, she cries, she's remorseful, and in this one, she kisses him with all her might, and then he transforms into a handsome prince, Tsarevich. And then they live happily ever after. Now there's a Swiss one called The Bear Prince, which is a lot like East of the Sun, West of the Moon, which I also have a video on, but it starts out very similarly. The dad's going and the two older sisters want some material things, but the youngest sister wants a grape. A single grape. Dad finds the grapes in the garden of the Bear Prince and he's like, you can have it, but you gotta bring back your daughter. She willingly goes, she marries him, they spend multiple nights together, but it's always dark at night. And this is where it's kind of East of the Sun, West of the Moon / Cupid and Psyche. So he lets her go visit her dad, and her dad gives her matches to bring back, and the bear's like all mad. He's like, you can't have the matches here though. And she's like, okay. And then like a year later, he's like, you can go visit your dad again. And this time the dad gives her matches and she brings them back, and while they're sleeping, she strikes it and sees that he's actually a handsome dude at night. Apparently, he needed to not show his human form to her for 2 years, and then now that the 2 years are up, she's able to see him, and that breaks the spell, and now he can be a prince all the time, and they can have their wedding properly and live together happily ever after. And I just have to add one more, this British one called The Small-Toothed Dog. And this one, the merchant gets rescued by this talking dog that says, I want the most precious thing you own in return. And he offers him like a goose that lays golden eggs, a fish that speaks 12 languages, and the dog's like, no, I want your daughter. So the daughter goes with him, she lives with him, but then after a while, he's like, you can go visit your family, but he's taking her there on his back, and he keeps saying, so what do you call me? And she's like, I think you're an ugly, foul-smelling, small-toothed dog. I don't know if he actually has small teeth or if she's just insulting him. He's like, oh, well, screw that, we're going back then. And so each time he'll take her further on the journey, but then she'll insult him and he'll take her back. So finally she realizes what's up and she keeps saying, I call you my honey love, sweet as a honeycomb. And then he takes her all the way there. And while they're staying there, she's about to call him an insult again, but then realizes that that's gonna hurt his feelings. And so she doesn't and calls him sweet again. And that is what transforms him. He rips off his dog fur and he's the handsomest man ever with the smallest teeth you ever saw, which I guess is hot to her. And they get married and live happily ever after. Also, there's a Danish one called Beauty and the Horse where the beast is just straight up a horse. I just think that's hilarious. Yes, most of these stories were meant to tell young girls, hey, whoever your dad tells you to marry, even if he seems like a beast, you should do it. It'll probably work out fine as long as you're nice. Is that sexist and messed up? Yes. But does it also have the message of looking past appearances and being kind to people? Yeah. But most importantly, these beasts earn their love by treating them well. And that is what makes her happy and want to be with him. Who'da thunk? I have a podcast called Folktales and Fairy Lore. The link is in my bio. I also have a YouTube channel. Link is there too. And I have a book, Dust Spells, which is based on the Brothers Grimm story, The 12 Dancing Princesses, or The Shoes That Were Danced to Pieces, only with romance and ghosts and moonshine in the 30s in the Dust Bowl. Awesome romance with a romantic hero that deserves his woman because he knows how to treat her right. And no Stockholm Syndrome.